Hello everyone, and welcome to a somewhat unexpected video talking about everything we've learned immediately upon the announcement of Expansion Pass 2 for Hearts of Iron 4. With it, we now know the breadth of content coming over the next year, the three main content DLCs being No Compromise, No Surrender, covering East Asia, Thunder at Our Gates, covering Southeast Asia, and Australia, with Australia, the Dutch East Indies and Thailand getting content, and finally a very small unique focus pack specifically for Czechoslovakia called Peace for Our Time. This video can be broken down into two sections. In the first section, I'm going to be taking a look at the videos they have provided us, including the announcement trailer and the discussion that came afterwards, and just talking about some of the points they bring up. In the second half of the video, which should be a timestamp on screen now, we will look at the Steam page where we get to see some interesting information, specifically focus tree reveals. So if you want to go see some focus trees, that should be in the second half. Without further ado though, let's take a look at some of this new content. So I'm unsure as to how much I can actually work through and show you here, transformative content and everything, but when they bring up an interesting point, I'll try to comment on it. Wow.
No Compromise, No Surrender is the next expansion for Hearts of Iron 4. Its focus is on Japan, China and the Pacific.
So it appears some things have changed since last we saw China. For starters, it's blue now, so I guess thanks to popular demand, China has had a nice colour change, and additionally, things just look different all across the board. For those who might not remember, the old original representation of China we got looked something like this. Korea was independent, that was a change, China was yellow, and it appeared like the Shandong clique and the Guangdong clique were puppet states of China. Additionally, Xi'an clique was, named that. In our newer image, the Northeastern Army has replaced the Xi'an clique, so an interesting change there. Korea has been re-annexed, so if anybody was expecting Korea content, the chances have drastically gone down. The Shandong clique and the Guangdong clique down here are no longer sharing the colour of their presumed overlord of China, so maybe they've gone independent, or maybe that was just a misrepresentation of the colour scheme. Additionally, and this really is just working through speculation now, it seems that there's a HOI4 clique that's coming down from the north. Now, a part of you could think that this is just another country they've added on top of the other ones, maybe because we lost Korea, we got this one, but it also could be not 1936, and this is a representation of the Japanese-owned territory just outside of Beijing. In case you're wondering what I'm referring to, I'm talking about this state here, East Hebei, owned by Japan. So it could be the case that East Hebei is now some kind of Hebei puppet owned by Japan, which will be in control of the territory as you're pushing through this region. Moving on to our next image is kind of something we already knew, but the Chinese Soviet Republic has shrunk somewhat from the current Communist China implementation, so a much more difficult thing to manage. What the more eagle-eyed among you might notice is this long line flowing through. I guess we'll talk about it in a sec, but you might have guessed what it is by now. There we go. Now that is a much better image to look at. That is the Great Wall of China. Back during Gotterdammerung, for the first time we started getting monuments on the map, but it seems that this is going to be a continuing trend, and my goodness, what a significant upgrade from the previous ones. This wall is something. I legit think CK3, with its China expansion of its own, will actually have something to contend with trying to make a model as large as this. I wonder if it would give you any bonuses, maybe like 10% max entrenchment on any tile that the wall goes through. So it's kind of like you can garrison some men on a semi-pre-built fort. It won't be too much garrison because, well, you know, You can't entrench too much in a stone wall without anything else, but it is something. Japan. It appears I'm going to have to eat my own hat after this one, because in this image you can clearly see that Easterby is definitely not turned into a puppet. So probably maintaining some level of independence here. As was the case with Korea, sometimes decisions can be flip-flopped. At one moment there is no Korea, then there is Korea, and then there's not Korea again. So forgive me for the whiplash, but I think we're all kind of feeling our way through as to what will actually be in the final release.
The biggest danger you need to look out for is the Western powers and their very large industrial bases. The US may seem weak at first, but their large industrial base may prove very difficult to overcome in a prolonged war.
I do think there were those that were considering that the United States might be getting some content in this DLC, and I think it's safe to say now that that ship has sailed. The chances are, well, 0, because it would have been in the announcement, and it's not. But nevertheless, you still might see some updates here and there for some content, if you're lucky. So briefly going back into dev diaries, we did see a little bit to do with the core goals of Nationalist China being to unite National China into one major country. This is of course part, as they say, with their faction rework, so here you can see the faction, and interestingly, some of the Western warlords do not join. So unlike with the current version, where it's pretty much kind of guaranteed that every warlord will join you against Japan, maybe in this version, some of the more outlier warlords will not be joining you. So this is peculiar indeed. The Commonwealth of the Philippines is blue. One can only assume then that this is a choice to better reflect that they are very much so under the vassalage of America at this time period, but perhaps as they gain more autonomy, they can return to the colour scheme that we are more familiar with, which is interesting. Additionally, they've had a renamed title to Commonwealth of the Philippines. So yeah, definitely representing their puppetry with this aesthetic change.
In No Compromise, No Surrender, we are working on making factions more unique and immersive.
Why on God's earth are the allies a bright, is that cyan blue? What is that? That cannot be the final choice of colour.
Factions will also follow a set of rules, like who can join the faction, who can declare war, and how faction leadership changes. Rules can be
I'm sorry. What? What? So not only have the Allies gone into some very peculiar looking colour conventions for their faction, we now see the American Commonwealth. Well, if there were any doubts about there being changes to America, I guess we can put them to a side, because that is one hell of a change if you're telling me in 1936 America now has a starting faction. With it, we will probably see the Philippines being their sole member. I suppose the real question is, what was the reasoning for this change? I mean, we definitely know there are going to be big changes to the way factions work. It's kind of one of the major selling points of the DLC, but the justification for the Americans having their own faction separate to the Allies, one can only assume that ultimately the American Commonwealth will unite or merge into the Allies. They won't stay as two separate factions for the entire conflict, because if they do, my goodness, the consequences of that are dramatic. Think about it from Germany. You can invade Britain, get the peace deal with Britain, because the only majors are going to be like Britain, France, and maybe Poland. Make sure you do it before India becomes a major, and you get your peace deal. You can annex Canada, even if America joins the conflict. For that reason, it's very difficult for me to truly believe this is what I'm looking at. America must dismantle this faction and join the Allies at some point.
Shaped using faction initiatives earned from completing goals. These initiatives can also unlock powerful upgrades such as research sharing, supreme command.
As an aside, it turns out you can see the Great Wall of China from space.
With this expansion, we release a complete rework of the doctrine system, giving players deeper control over how their armed forces evolve. Instead of a single static tree, doctrines now combine grand doctrines, your overarching military strategy with customizable sub-doctrines.
I'm sorry, this is so dramatically groundbreaking. I don't even know how they kept this under the radar. That is the first we're hearing of this, and they're just, oh yeah, by the way, this is coming too. So putting aside that this is 1937 with the German military junta being played for some strange reason, we now begin with an empty land doctrine. Presumably this applies to the big three especially, and then from there you get to choose where to go. The beginning step is choosing which of the big four you go with, which does look familiar, but it's interesting. I do wonder if this is early UI and is subject to change, but there's 4 here, but there's space where it feels like you could intend to add more. Brand new grand doctrines. This must be a UI thing. There's no shot they're going to keep it open like this. Then, having picked your doctrine, instead of having a single little tree to work down, you unlock 4 separate trees with different categories. In this case, we've got infantry, the one underneath here, armor and operations, and then you specialize your individual doctrine to what you're doing. So no more are you going to be on rails when you pick what doctrine you're picking. Does this mean you can go Grand Battle Plan and get the manpower bonuses you would have otherwise got with mobile warfare and mass assault? Does this basically change everything? This is such a dramatic meta-changing shift. I'm so shocked that it's just casually brought in, like in the second half of the video. Discussions from mobile warfare about Great War Infantry, something one would probably expect to see in Grand Battle Plan. Moving on, when they click Mobile Infantry, we can see that one of the given rewards is a research bonus for truck. So not only are you getting buffs for infantry, or I should really say the divisions themselves, and tactics, you can also get research bonuses now? So in some ways, you could train your army to get the research to expand your army. Additionally, you can see, I assume as you gain more XP, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, you can spend it to get better and better upgrades. So 5 upgrades per tree, and then there's 4 trees, so 20 upgrades in total, which is pretty good considering the almost is, slightly more than what you currently get with the average doctrine. Additionally, they say they're updating the Army Corps and Spirits, which might mean they're going to remove the legendary portrait of Karl Marx with ideological loyalty, which gives 500 weekly manpower, 2,000 a month. That was core to some countries' builds. Let us all pray that in some capacity something like this survives, because otherwise playing micronations in this game has basically gone back to being semi-impossible. Semi-impossible.
Thunder at Our Gates is a theatre pack for Hearts of Iron 4. It includes focus trees and feature updates for Australia, Indonesia and Siam.
So there we have it, the big 3, Australia, Dutch East Indies and Siam. And I don't know, I don't want to start off by being pessimistic, but I am somewhat confused. On this screenshot here, is there one country visible that feels like there is no other point in the timeline of this game that it could use an update? And it's not. I am of course talking about British Malaya, sitting there, literally part of the Allies from day one, a significant exporter of rubber and resources to the rest of the Allied powers, and seemingly overlooked. Again, coming in at a close second, I'm also surprised that New Zealand hasn't been mentioned in any capacity. These 2 nations, British Malaya and New Zealand, have shockingly low content, Malaya having 0, so while I understand you might want to cover this region, missing those 2 nations really has caught me off guard. Still, I am excited to see Siam, East Indies and Australia.
The primary features we're looking at adding is primarily the military HQs, which allows you to deploy generals and use them to wield local command. And by doing so, you can support your troops directly in the field with updated abilities, proximity, and also with some features for the division designer. We also are looking at ship captains, that is having named captains for your ships, which you can use to earn skills and later promote to admirals to lead your fleets.
So I let that play because I feel like they can explain it better than us, but let's briefly talk. So it seems that the two features they're adding are kind of similar to one feature we received not too long ago, which is here, the officers. Each individual unit has an officer. In this case, it's this little Brigadier Zhang here. Going forward, it seems that each individual ship that you have will also have a naval officer who can be promoted, akin to what you have here, to become an admiral. So I guess there's a way for you to have more historical promotions for your naval content, which has parity now with the land content. There is of course no equivalent for Air Force, you don't run the Air Force that way, but there are aces, so that's something. The other thing they mentioned is the military HQ, which is an addition, if I understand it correctly, which I have heard being talked about and desired for quite some time. It sounds like it has the ability to turn an officer into an on-the-ground unit that gives an AoE of support to surrounding units. For those who are wondering, something like that already exists in the game in the form of railway guns, which also give you an AoE of positive effect. In the case of the HQ though, I wonder if it's going to allow you to give buffs to supply and entrenchment and basically all the other buffs that aren't just necessarily attack and defense and are more so based on organization. I know, very much so, there is a ginger streamer on Twitch who has long been demanding a mobile supply camp that you can move around the map and give supply to different units where you're doing pushes. And there has been no feature I've heard that sounds more relevant to this than the addition of the HQ with officers. So very interesting addition to the game.
This is a collaboration between PDS Gold and a group of content experts with a great deal of modding experience.
So perhaps in a first for HOI4, they are discussing the addition of a single focus tree for a single nation as a content DLC, which is very peculiar, and I imagine it's going to get quite some backlash depending on what the price tag is going to be. Czechoslovakia was not given an advanced rework akin to what Yugoslavia and Romania got during a previous DLC. Instead, they've kind of stayed the same since Death or Dishonor, and it certainly is showing its age. I mean, this right here is the political path, and there's not too much to talk about.
You'll be able to stay the path of democracy, return the monarchy to the throne, embrace nationalism, or choose one of several varieties of communism to lead your nation.
So the addition of a monarchy to Czechoslovakia is very interesting. I can only assume they're talking about the Bohemian crown, but what crown are they referring to? Haven't there been like 4 dynasties sitting on the Bohemian throne? I guess you won't get the Prismlid dynasty considering they're gone, but the House of Luxembourg or the Habsburgs, I guess most likely has to be the Habsburgs. Maybe it would be a case akin to Poland and you get to choose a monarch to invite. I just think it's kind of interesting that they casually discuss the nature of inviting a king. As an independent Czecho land or Bohemian land hasn't been around in this time period for a little bit now. Interesting to note then that they're really wanting to make Czechoslovakia a kind of veteran experience, something that's going to be really difficult, but promotes you to want to take it as a challenge and not just lay down and get annexed. Which, I don't know, was that a similar conversation they had when they made the Austria focus tree? Because I do remember there being a pretty good way for you to build yourself up pretty quick, get very strong, and completely reject the Germans. But then again, I suppose once Germany annexes Austria through Anschluss, you're going to be a lot weaker compared to Germany. So, I don't know. Interesting comparison. With that, we have reached the end of the first part of this video, talking about their video. Hopefully there were some nuggets that you gleaned from there. I certainly saw some new stuff I didn't expect. Now let's head over to the Steam page, because, as they usually do, They have revealed the early focus tree designs because they wanted images to stick on Steam. So, let's go have a look. Hello and welcome back if you joined us by time skipping to this section of the video, or continuing on from where we were just talking about. My goodness, that Chinese wall, I am literally in awe every time I look at it. It has to be one of the largest models in the game now, just straight up. Such an interesting choice of something to add. Going down to the about this content, looking at no compromise and no surrender, we can see some information which we kind of already knew. The Japanese focus tree, letting you reshape the Pacific. The Communist Chinese focus tree, doing pretty much as you want to rightful ascendancy. Nationalist China, being about unifying the warlords under one national government. The Philippines focus tree, defending the islands with some old history. But down here's where things get interesting. The new military doctrines, which we only just learned about, talk about shaping your own armed forces with unique doctrines that accompany a rework of core systems. With this, can we then expect there to be some new grand doctrines? I know we only saw 4, but now I am starting to wonder whether there would be something significant. Additionally, we see additional supporting features and quality of life updates, such as naval special projects and updates to naval combat. One can assume then that some of these naval special projects will just be some larger ships, specifically the ones the Japanese were trying to build, the mega ships, but it also makes you wonder about some alternative history things they could go with. But anyway, let's take a look at some of these focus trees. Let's start off with the main one, Japan, because we really haven't seen too much to do with Japan, and in the image that we were given on Steam, it seems to exclusively be showing us the alternative history path. Additionally, for some people who might care, you can note that the year is 1936, and we start with 2 additional factories than we normally would. The manpower is higher, and instead of being on our ridiculously high stability, we're now massively shot down to 31%. Zooming in, we can do a little bit of focus tree investigation. Doing Okada's military purge speech begins a series of alternative history focuses mixed between communism and democracy. On the left, you can secretly rebuild the Japanese Communist Party before the return of the Manchukuo exiles, or build an anti-army coalition and divert away military funds. We don't really know what this is amounting to, it's just one image, but considering they both end in revoking the peace preservation law, one maybe could consider this to be a civil war. On the right, we do see some sub-focuses on the democratic side to do with bribing generals and then appointing new generals. So there is something to do with conflict here that might ultimately be related to a civil war. Further on down, we don't see too much of the communist side, but we do see incorporating some Buddhist socialism and Kiku's new model with women in industry. So really not too much to talk about, it's all hidden away underneath the 3 tags split between communist democratic, monarchy and historical. On the democratic side, however, they've left nothing to the imagination. Having presumably won some kind of democratic victory, you begin a long series of focuses about organising a general election. Between it, you seem to have a more honest version of democracy versus the more, let's say, internal cronyist version of democracy. Maybe that's a misrepresentation, but considering Amokadari is a form where people in government go on to take positions in corporations and basically maintain their level of power, it would make me believe this. After that, you also get to choose who will be leading the premiership with 5 different potentials, which you'd love to see. Some notable figures might include Abe Yesu with his sort of permanently closed eye, who will promote the labour unions as a much more socialist candidate. Alternatively, you could go with Ishiro Hatoyama, who is the founder of the LDP, which would make sense considering the focus directly below him is to form the LDP. This is of course a party that continues to the modern day and I believe was led by Shinzo Abe at one point. We don't know what the Japanese focus tree continues to go on after you have secured your democratic mandate. I would hope there is some content for you to pursue beyond just, electing a government and you're done, but that's all the information we have to work for in the democratic side. Flipping over, we get to see the monarchy side, which again is open to interpretation because of how low pixel it is, but we can basically work it out. Following the February 26th incident, we can presume in this alternative history event that the loyalists to the emperor, who wanted to basically use him as their sole mandate, will gain power. With that, you can immediately authorize aid for Ethiopia, so really screw over the Italians. Finally moving down to the Showa restoration. After that, seems to be quite a wide focus path. On the left, you can ally the League of Blood, which is a very dramatic faction within Japan, who do seem to have contacts with the samurai, should you pursue it. Additionally, you can choose to oppose the Zaibatsu, which, considering we know there are internal factions within Japan, along with the military and the navy, it would make sense if you want to secure the mandate of the emperor. I keep saying mandate, but this is not China. Its core central path in the center is about embracing Kokutai. Its core path in the center is about embracing Kokutai, which my understanding is the green pheasant is kind of this semi-divine, unique government position that the actions of Japan should all be pure to its image, and thus the cultural prevalence of how Japan will present itself will be quite important, considering the next two focuses are very clearly between choosing the shoguns or the emperor himself. A difficult choice for those who might want both of them for different reasons. I do wonder whether the shogunate would have the option to choose who will be the shogun, or whether it's just given to you, or maybe you just stay with the emperor himself, although he should become kind of a nominal role, but not necessarily in charge. After that, you get to choose which faction you want to work alongside. On the right, we have what one can be presumed as going it alone, or working within your own faction, joining with the Germans, which would be very interesting if you worked with the Ethiopians to screw over Italy, which would now become your ally, or utilising their Polish friendship, which was a unique position held by Japan in this time period that they had to abandon in favour of working alongside the Germans. However, if you were to take this focus by speedrunning it, I wonder if you could transition the priorities of your nation to trying to deliver 1 million Japanese into Bydgoszcz to try and help them against the German threat. I mean, the fact that these two focuses are next to each other but are diametrically opposed in their aims is kind of surprising. Ultimately, you can work down improving the spirit of the nation, propagandizing the Nihon Shokai, the Yamato spirit, being the children of the sun. Ultimately, all of these kind of cultural identity-based focuses really match with the embracing of the Kokutai, so it all makes sense. With that, that's all we get from this early screenshot, but don't worry, we've got some more to go look at. Particularly, next up is the Chinese Soviet Republic. Not doing anywhere near as good as previously seen with Japan, only 2 factories. Due to a lack of mutually exclusive, we can presume this is a historical path to put an end to the Sufan and rallying the industry, this being the industrial path. Re-establishing state bank, choosing your currency, choosing your trading policy, kind of the basic things one might need to establish before setting up a nation. Not too much to comment on here, although it is funny that the localization didn't get finished for this resource focus, despite the fact it's on Steam. At the bottom, you can see a focus to construct the Bangchao Dam, which is interesting to think that dams are not going to be left behind, and there is the option to build more of them. So any time that features are reused in future DLCs, I'm always happy. Hidden away on the left of the screen, you can see what looks to be a military-based tree with strict training regiments, army reforms, and Soviet battle tactics. It's not the only army tree though, because on the far right we see the Long March to Recovery, trying to restore the army after they did the infamous Long March, building up the Red Army and trying to supply the army so that you can eventually choose between asymmetric warfare, I guess for countering the Chinese, or conventional warfare, working alongside the Chinese, probably in a united effort against Japan. Ultimately, it feels like you'd want to be taking these focuses as a primary goal, considering that both China and Japan are going to be threats to you, and not so much worrying about setting up a national economy. At the bottom, you can see a split into the kind of traditional ground forces, air forces, and hidden off screen, navy forces for the third phase of the army. So this is a transition from being the remnants of an army into becoming a proper one. Considering that PRC starts as such a small little Chinese Soviet republic, it will be interesting to see whether they have added content for the potential eventuality of becoming mainland China, one China policy, or whether the content doesn't stretch that far, because ultimately, if you're playing as the Chinese Soviet Republic, the goal will be to unite China and then expand your influence. And finally, we've got the Commonwealth of the Philippines. Now, everything shown here, I believe, has been shown before, so if you want to go see that, I have a video talking about the Philippines Dev Corner on this channel already, but we do get a better look at the framing. So on the right is the puppet path, where you are part of the United States Army Force in the Far East, with MacArthur and Eisenhower. In the middle, you've got what is the core industry tree, although looking at it, it might have some overlap with also being the political tree, which I didn't consider at the time, because if you align with Japan, leverage the peso, although it's not mandatory that you do that, you can go down rebuild the Sandinista, the accusers, which is basically the access path to fascism. So if that is something you wanted to go with, rebuild the Sandinistas, or the accusers, which is basically the fash path for all intensive purposes. So yeah, the industry/political path. Ultimately, by the way, this is my favorite design that there is for when it comes to designing industry. So of all of the things I've seen out of any of these focus trees, this is the bit I've loved the most. It's the early build up, 10 focuses to choose from, phase 2, 10 focuses to choose from, phase 3, 6 focuses I think, and then a little bit at the bottom. So just a really cool, nice build up. You know where each phase is, very clear to understand, little tidbits on the side to explore, perfect. Unfortunately, because the other DLCs are so far into the future, Warships of the Pacific being in Q1 of 2026, there isn't actually any photos or info to work with. Thunder at Our Gates coming in Q2, so later spring, early summer, but again, nothing we really know. We can, however, glean stuff from the Steam description. Australian focus tree, doing what it kind of traditionally did, either you support your allies or go against the Japanese, and I think you can also join them in some cases. With the Siam focus tree, you can turn rival nations into pawns, exploit the great powers, and carve out your own empire, which is interesting foreshadowing if it basically allows you to form the Rataconisin Kingdom, which I think is a old school formable nation, with a maybe peaceful method to do so. Additionally, we see Indonesian focus tree. By steering the course of Indonesia's future, you can, of course, remain under Dutch rule or fight for independence. Under a new patron, is this foreshadowing that you have the option to choose a new overlord, becoming, for example, the Japanese East Indies? Although from the Japanese perspective, would they call it their West Indies? That is an interesting thing to consider, picking a new overlord. Additionally, we see military HQs getting some more information about wielding local command and supporting your troops through command abilities, so proximity, and new division design features, so maybe a way to customize your divisions with a commander general in them. This is all very vague, but if you can glean something from this, feel free to tell me in the comments. And of course, as previously mentioned, ship captains, akin to what we saw with the introduction of officers, being moved to Navy. And last but not least, Peace for Our Time, the Bohemian focus tree, also scheduled for Q2. I'm interested to see if any of this gets moved or if it's really all within this time frame. Wow, they didn't start with didnt. Working alongside some veteran modders, listed here, they have added in a unique challenge to fight against overwhelming odds. The traditional democratic path, multiple communist paths. The features they've included have got a tremendous amount of description considering there isn't much known about them. The democratic path, surrounded by non-democratic nations, you can forge your own faction, lead a government in exile, which maybe means government in exile focuses and mechanics, or pursue independence as Slovakia. So nobody has talked anything about playing as Slovakia. Does that mean the Czechoslovakia tree can become a Slovakia tree and a Bohemia tree? Like two separate trees? Does it mean Slovakia is released and they have their own focus tree? Because then it's two focus trees. If you can pursue independence as Slovakia, that does imply there's going to be more content than what people might first be thinking. Next on down is a communist national focus path, spark a socialist revolution, as one can imagine, join the Comintern, or do your own federation. Unfortunately, this entire path section is unplayable because they misspelt the word weather, and unfortunately minor spelling mistake means it's just not playable. They've mixed together monarchism and fash, but you can rally the nationalist forces to establish a new kingdom of Bohemia. Again, who's the king? Whomst? Or embrace a military dictatorship, expand your influence through allies or subjects, and decide to entrench authoritarianism or return to democracy once the crisis has passed. Interesting. So it's not necessarily staying as this. This could be just a transitional government in a time of crisis. It is always interesting to see a focus tree that takes into account that governments don't just stay the same all the time and can transition throughout the game. Because a lot of the time you kind of start as one ideology, you switch to another by 39, and then you stick as that for the rest of the game. So if there's the option to transition maybe mid-war or just after, then that's interesting to explore. The final thing I'll note on this is just whizzing through, manage an arms industry as we can expect, new art, including Prague Castle, and I can't pronounce that castle. So these are presumably more of those on-the-map things like the Great Wall of China, and engage with the divided nation mechanic, something we're not entirely sure what it will visually look like, but seems to be an amalgamation between balance of power, decisions, and other elements to create something that is quite difficult to play. And with that, we have come to the end of this week's... What is this? It's not a dev corner, it's not a dev diary. I suppose it's the Expansion Pass 2 content reveal. I understand this has been a lot of talking, and it might not be for everyone, but there was a lot of information to pass, and maybe there was stuff in there that you didn't notice otherwise. If you appreciated me going through all of this and talking about it, then please feel free to like and subscribe. It really, really helps me out and promotes me to continue doing so. It will also, of course, show you when I'm next making videos, because dev diaries will be coming and I will be covering them. So, until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Sayonara.